Hey guys, welcome to another episode of AJ's Alternate History podcast. I'm your friendly historian Arjun, and in this episode, we are collaborating with one of my friends over here who's interested in alternate history as well. So, if you would have been following a podcast in the last few episodes, we've been talking about what would have happened if North and South Korea ever reunified. And in our alternate history timeline, as of now, North Korea has won the war and has taken over the entire peninsula. Now, the next question which comes to our mind is that what will happen after North Korea takes over South? And now that the peninsula is entirely occupied, now what will the North Korean leadership do? Will it have a purge, or how, or what kind of foreign interference, especially from China or the Soviet Union, will happen within the government of North Korea? So, these are pretty tricky questions. So I decided I'll just call upon one of my friend over here. So in today's episode, we have Vikas. So hi Vikas, welcome to this episode.
Hi Arjun, thank you so much for having me.
So here's a small introduction to Vikas. So I know Vikas, like me and Vikas went to the same J school, so we know each other. Vikas is like a year junior to me. So we both have been bonding over discussing politics and sociology and these kinds of things in college. That's when I felt it would be really intuitive to call someone who has a good in-depth knowledge about the left and communist ecosystem. So it's an absolute pleasure to have you in our podcast today, Vikas. So how do you feel?
It's really nice. It's the first time I've been, I'm speaking in a podcast first of all. So I think that will be a very nice experience for me. And maybe, who knows, it might inspire me to start my own podcast.
Yeah, yeah. So great
Yeah,
to have you. So because just before we start discussing the alternate scenarios as such, just a few
right.
ground things to remember for both the viewers and us over here who's discussing the podcast. So
Mhm.
AG's Alternate History podcast is just for entertainment and education purposes. So we don't sort of endorse any kind of political agenda or political ideology on our podcast, and whatever opinions are being discussed over here is just for like our understanding of events in our timeline, as well as coming up with alternative scenarios. So we don't endorse any political ideology. So I hope you don't misunderstand or say misconstrue whatever is being told in this podcast as to being real, until and unless we mention as to this is what happened in our timeline and so on and so forth, and until it is stated as it is a fact. So with that being said, Vikas, shall we roll into today's episode?
Yes, please.
Okay. So, because if I mean, you would have heard our previous episode. So, in that, we basically concluded by saying that, in our AJ's timeline, North Korea
Right,
has basically won the 3 year long war in the Korean Peninsula, which happened between
right.
1950 to 53. Now, the next question is that, it never ends over there, right? Like whenever something like this happens, the story just doesn't get over. So now we are going to basically construct an alternate universe, or say parallel reality, in which we are trying to predict what happens after the Korean Peninsula has been reunified. So you want to start off by giving any opinions of yours on this topic?
So yeah, talking about opinions, I think there's two important things that we need to consider while thinking of an alternate event. So first of all, I think again with since the US and Russia were involved in this war, it's very pretty fair to assume that say the North Korean side have occupied the entirety of Korea. It's not that they're not opposed by anybody so far, right? Because the US is not known to give up very soon, right? So they have a lot of methods of warfare, or say economic consequences, things like that, that they can
Yeah, like
try
sanctions.
right, sanctions, and on almost try to maybe strangle the peninsula, if I can use the word.
Hmm.
Because I don't think from say my personal opinion, I don't think that's beyond what they could do. There's one point to consider, and the other point to consider is the kind of allies that Korea as a whole can make, because
Hmm.
since as far as to the best of my knowledge, at least in in the northern part of Korea, there aren't a lot of cultivatable land. So they have issues of growing food crops and all of that. So to that extent, I really do believe that in this situation, if you want to talk when we do, if we need to construct a situation where Korea is at an advantage, they certainly need to have a lot of strong allies.
That's a very good point to start off with. Okay, so yeah, you seem to be very reality bound sort of analysis over here. So now, with that being said, talking about allies, so whenever this happens, and this is one thing, I mean, dear listeners, if you would be reading about history, you know that the 1950s and early 1960s were a really troublesome time within the communist sphere of the world, because there was a Sino-Soviet split, and then two of the world's largest communist powers were having a tough between ideological dispute, right? So considering that, to add to this scenario, or even within our timeline, that is the real timeline in which we are living, North Korea did have factionalism and this massive purge in the month of August of 1956. It is also known as the August faction incident of 1956. So there also, within the North Korean Communist Party, People's Workers Party, you had several factions, and two of the main factions were the Soviet Koreans and the Yan'an, or the Chinese faction. So because, like, these both factions are really really powerful and are at equal terms when you're talking about a country like North Korea, or say unified Korea in this sense. So
Right.
what do you think would be the likelihood of one of the factions, say, overthrowing the guerrilla faction, or say Kim Il Sung's, the OG faction over here? Like, do you think is there
Right.
any likelihood?
Um, Again, to the best of my knowledge, I think Kim Il Sung's faction had the most support from the people.
Mm-hmm.
So there's that, and I feel like within any political organization as such, there are always factions that exist. Even if you go and look into the panchayat elections in India, you would
Yeah,
still see tiny factions forming behind people and system of personality or cult figure that exists. So in a country, especially a communist country, I think that's very obvious. And again, from my opinion, this is what I can say is that certainly Kim Il Sung would have prevailed, and historically that's what happened. But then there is also a slight chance of the Soviet leaning faction to have prevailed, because one, they have a bigger support point. They have someone to rely on, right? So
true,
I think
true.
they do have a good chance. Maybe it's the Yan'an faction that had the slimmest chance of probably capturing power. I think the Soviet faction has a fair what do you say? They have
Chances
good
of
strengths, right? Right.
winning
Yeah.
the No, but I have a slightly contrary point of view here. Like, I mean, I do agree with what you're saying. Like, the Soviets
Right.
had a major support because they were the backbone of the party when the nation was formed in 48. But
Right.
considering that, during the 1950s, like, for to give context, what happened was, after Stalin's death, Nikita Khrushchev came up with his infamous de-Stalinization speech, and then that created a lot of negative ripples within the communist world. Like, China was the first to oppose that speech, saying that Nikita Khrushchev was the reformist, and he wanted to he was counter revolutionary, to say so. And then
Yeah.
that
And
was followed
revisionist or whatever they call it.
revisionist,
Yeah.
exactly.
Right.
So and that was followed by Kim Il Sung's statement as well. So considering all these things, would it have been a little more sort of logical to say if that the Chinese faction would have at least had a slim chance, although both the Soviets and the Chinese faction were criticizing the guerrilla faction of Kim Il Sung.
Okay, right. So, yeah, right. Again, good that you mentioned this point. One more advantage that China has, that it shares a direct border with North Korea. So does Russia, but the length of the border that they share isn't really, yeah, it's not that significant. So I think that's an advantage. China is geographically a lot closer to North Korea.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think that point, since I recall about that now, they did have a chance now, considering that. But then now, okay, now if you talk about this, now there's a chance of the Chinese and Soviet faction coming together, because now both of them have. I mean, assuming that the Soviet faction are also disappointed with what Nikita Khrushchev told about how. Because
Mm-hmm.
again, I feel like there was a lot of disagreement about his speech as well, right?
Very
So
true.
I think maybe they could come up with a common ground to, let's just say,
Yeah, like
combine their forces.
yeah, actually that's what happened in even in our timeline also. But
Right.
here I need to actually mention certain things like Kim Il Sung was actually informed, if I should say so, like a month beforehand itself. Like after the de-Stalinization speech of Khrushchev,
Right.
Kim Il Sung had actually gone to Moscow to take a look into this matter. And then
Hmm.
actually what happened was, I don't know. Apparently he was informed by someone within the party saying that something of this sort is coming up and people are trying to overthrow him. When he got to know that, he was very instinctually and smart enough, he just postponed the plenum which was to be held by 1 month, and the plenum which was supposed to be held in July of 1956 was postponed to August. And then he was able to identify who was criticizing him and effectively purge him. And I think that is a very, very smart move, considering the way politics is being played in this scenario.
Right. That's for sure. Right. Because as far as I can say, it's really difficult to find out who's the one that's going to stab you in the back. So you never
Exactly.
know, and it takes a lot of not just gut instinct, but it takes a lot of skill. And I mean, irrespective of what side of the political spectrum you are on, if you look
Hmm.
at it through the eyes of a politician or the leader of a nation, you're obviously going to try to, because you have a vision for your nation and you believe that that's the right way to go forward.
Curious to know what's going to happen next in this alternate timeline? Well, you got to wait until the next episode. So, why don't you check out my YouTube channel until then? Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe to AJ's Alternate History podcast on YouTube and its content. And also, don't forget to check out our Spotify channel as well. Yes, we are also there on Spotify. So, until the next episode, this is your friendly historian Arjun signing off. Bye bye.